It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Tlusty, who is Associate Professor of Sustainability and Food Solutions at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Thank you for joining us.
And just to kind of place where I'm coming from, I grew up in Illinois, so wasn't at all associated with the ocean at all. I went to University of Illinois for my undergrad. I was an animal science major, so I learned aquaculture. I did a PhD in fish behavior and spacing. Why do animals nest in colonies, or why don't fish? And then I wasn't competitive in the academic field, so I got a job modeling carrying capacity of salmon farming up in Newfoundland, Canada. So I spent 5 years over doing that. And then I came back to Boston. I worked for the aquarium for 18 years. I ran a lobster hatchery. I did a lot of work on shell disease and lobsters. But I also started doing seafood work and advising major companies on how to buy seafood more sustainably. I've done a lot of work on certifications and how do we just make things better. So that's kind of been my approach, how do we make things better. And then I went to UMass Boston in 2017. And again, because looking at food systems more holistically and starting to get interested in things like waste. And we just heard a great use of waste and byproducts. And so being at UMass kind of let me lead this real solutions-based thing. And so Chrissy earlier talked about 2 systems, the aquaculture sighting tool, both ShellFast and the sighting tool. I was involved with both of those, and my PhD student kind of looked at the regulatory process and we kind of helped align it and help farmers get to it in a more succinct fashion. Other projects we have are we're trying to build sensors for Vibrio, so if shellfish have the bacteria that's going to make you sick, we're trying to do a paper test strip so you could put it in the liquor and just say, oops, no, this one's going to be that. And again, helping farmers know when Vibrio is going to hit their farm so they can pull products, so they can get product to market, not be as impacted from some of these closures. We're working with a seaweed farmer up in Maine, and we're putting a sensor on a rope with a weakling. So when that weakling breaks and you know the gear's under stress, it sends a real-time report to your phone and it says, this system is undergoing stress, you need to go out and check it. This is super important for seaweed because one of the big complaints of seaweed is, a farmer puts it out for 3 weeks and they never even touch their system. They don't even go out to check on it. What if a whale entangles? That's always the what if everybody uses, and that's going to kill seaweed. So the what if is, well, if we know something hits the gear, we can get out there and we can sense it. So again, it's looking at what are the pain points for growers and how do you create solutions to do that. So next slide. All right, so this is just to kind of put seafood in context. This is Denniscott of Maine, a shell midden. So basically, as we would eat shells, we throw them away, put them in, and then the pile grows and grows and grows. 10,000 years of management. So for 10,000 years, shellfish has been integral to human consumption. Okay? Shellfish is so important in human consumption that our body needs omega-3 fatty acids, which are primarily derived from marine sources. These are the omega-3 fatty acids that help our membranes. And we published a study where we actually looked at a bunch of other studies, and we figured out by eating fish, kids can actually increase their IQ score by 7 points just by eating fish, just through omega-3 fatty acids. So super important. So we've been doing it for a long time. Next slide. Oops, I think we skipped one. But then when you look at oysters in the Chesapeake Bay, Chesapeake is actually an indigenous word meaning Great Shellfish Bay. They have 3,000-year-old shell middens there. In 1884, they harvested 50 million bushels, and they estimate that the entire volume of the Chesapeake was filtered every 3 days. That's the ecosystem service that these things provide. Years of over-harvesting. In 2019, they only harvested 145,000 bushels, and they figure it takes those oysters 700 days to filter the water. So again, shellfish super important, but when we don't manage them well, we suffer the consequences. Next. Fishing is a driver of settlement. I mentioned I lived in Newfoundland. The whole reason people came to Newfoundland was to fish the grand eggs and for cod. All right, and next slide. And cod is the poster child for overharvesting. You know, we peaked at 800,000 tons, collapse of population, and this was a resource that everybody just said you couldn't overlook. You couldn't outdo it, and we managed to. So the definition of overexploitation. All right, next. So when you look at aquaculture, you know, in the United States, we really think, oh, this aquaculture, it's new. It's new to us. It's not new to the world. All right, carp were domesticated. They estimate around 6,000 BC. And again, it's been super important. Next slide. This is the same fish pond in Hawaii that was set up 800 years ago. This is a little bit different system in that they basically open up this weir right there on a high tide, and they actually let fish come into the pond, and then they close it off, and then they actually manage the fish that are in the pond throughout, and then until there's the next real king tide, and then they'll fill it up again. So it's an integration of culture of wild animals. So it's a little bit different. Next slide. This is the Czech Republic. This fish pond was built in the 1300s for carp, still being used today. And this is just, it's fascinating. I got a chance to visit Trayvon, and the community uses the ponds. There was like a rowing competition on the pond, and people are camping by it. And it's so integral just to the community itself. I mean, again, they've been living with this for such a long time. And you know, there's many definitions of sustainability. And when you think about, one of them is, can you sustain? So sustain is Latin, it means to lift up and to support. When you can do something for, you know, hundreds of years, you're really supporting it. You're really keeping it going. All right, so, but then we got this. Okay, this is Luan Bay. These are mostly tilapia producers. It's a freshwater system. You know, this kind of, again, is a definition of overcapacity. You know, carrying capacity is this room has a carrying capacity, and it's set by the fire department. Everything kind of has a capacity in what you can do. And when you start to overpack things, that's when problems happen. And so again, this is why in the US we always kind of point to, you know, all those rules Chrissy was talking about at the beginning. This is why they're so important, so we don't get into these situations. Next. And so again, why worry about why should we be worried about seafood? If you think about, this is per ton of protein consumed, and these are just greenhouse gas emissions. And basically on the dotted line, you just have plant-based diets and animal-based. And again, beef and dairy and poultry and pork are these, and they have the greater impacts. You get eggs here, you get fish, and then you get all of your vegetables. So from an animal protein standpoint, the greenhouse gas impacts are a little bit less. You know, and if you think about that, there's a lot of things shellfish have going for it. Okay, they're not ectotherms, or sorry, they're ectotherms, they're not endotherms, so they don't produce their own heat. We produce heat. You know, 10% of everything we eat has to go just to maintain our body heat. Fish don't do that. They get that food where they can actually use it for other things. They're floating in water. spending energy standing right now. Fish don't have to do that, they just float. So this is one of the reasons fish are actually really efficient at converting feed to food, is because of just these traits about them. Next. But really what we need to do is we need to look at impacts. And so if we just kind of take some big seaweed, plant shellfish, herbivorous fish, carnivorous fish, and then if we kind of look at impacts, for both fisheries and aquaculture, you can talk about these different kind of impact schemes, where if you're talking about aquaculture, oysters are great because we don't feed them. We're not adding things in the water to make them grow. We're actually using everything that sits in the water by itself. When you start getting into salmon, tilapia, carp, a lot of those things you start adding feed into. And so you're adding nutrients into the water, and that's where you start getting systems out of balance. And so your impacts kind of go up as you go from unfed to fed. If we're talking about fisheries, you can talk about fish that are school and they're caught in big schools of fish, or fish that are caught individually. And that's going to kind of drive a lot of the differences. But again, it's not just what's the impact, it's like what do we get out of those animals. So on the next slide, what you can do is you can talk about what a relative nutritional score is, and then what the impact is. So these are high impacts, and these are nutritious species over here. And so if we can move the inset, just so we can see what all the colors are. So like this, super high, and just click on the next slide. So really, these are good. Super nutritious, really low impact. And so herring, mackerel, those are the fish we actually really want to be eating. They have a lot of nutrients in them, and they don't really have many greenhouse gas emissions. Some of it's the way they're caught and that. These are the things we really want to. So freshwater whitefish, Pangasius, tilapia, those, they tend to be less nutrient dense, a lot higher impacts. Lobsters and shrimp come up. Lobsters, are super interesting. They're so important culturally to us. But if you think about it, it's, one or two people going out in a boat, harvesting 100 pounds and coming back. And they're spending all that diesel. And then how do you catch lobsters? Pots. In pots? What do you put in pots?
And fish.
Yeah, you use fish. You put fish in. So you actually have to spend the energy to get that fish, and then you have to spend the energy to get the fish to the lobster net, and then you spend the energy to put the lobster in, or the fish in the pot, and then you take it out onto the water. And that's actually, so lobster is really a fed fish species. And in fact, I'm sorry, what?
It's fish farming.
It is. It's, yeah. A lot of people are like, I'm going to feed the lobsters.
Yeah.
That's, and it's true. John Grabowski at Northeastern University has actually looked at, you can use some chemical signatures to figure out what the lobsters are eating, and like 80% of what lobsters are eating is bait. So we're actually subsidizing it. To the point of, it takes about 3 pounds of bait to land a pound of lobster. So a 3-to-1 feed conversion ratio. Like aquaculture gets beat up if they have like anything over one pound of fish to 1 pound of like in the salmon industry. They talk about fish in, fish out ratios. How much fish does it take to make fish? The salmon industry gets pounded if they go above 1, and lobster industry got 3. And, So again, like there's many layers to sustainability. We can talk about the social aspect. So it's really good, but we got these other things. So anyway, but so a digression about them, and then a lot of the whitefish, low greenhouse gas, but again, they don't have a lot of those long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, which makes them really nutrient dense. Next slide.
Can I ask, what is that high nutritional green dot up there?
This is likely an oyster. And some of it is, right now, the greenhouse gas emissions of oysters are really bad because so few studies have been done on them. And so a lot of times, It's funny, the previous speaker mentioned, oh, the scientists have to have the watchers over. A lot of times science starts with like, oh, let's look at this really bad case thing, okay? And so, yeah, there's, again, a lot of it is, the small dots are like number of studies. And actually, to fill out the slide, beef, pork, chicken, eggs, okay? So, again, the other thing this points to is when you sit there and you say seafood is, you've missed the message. Because it's really, you can't really say seafood and then talk about, freshwater whitefish and herring. So we need to have a much more nuanced discussion about it. Unfortunately, in the US, that's not the way you think about things, How many people, and not people in this room, but just in general, people like have a bad piece of fish and then say, I'm never eating seafood again. Yeah. Where if you get bad chicken, you're like, oh, that was rat chicken, and I'll get a different brand. Our switching is really interesting. So this didn't come out great, but so far today we've heard a lot about mechanisms. How do we use fish processing waste to make something functional? How do we actually grow oysters? What do we do in setting up stuff? And then that kind of moves into a systems discussion. What are the rules and how do we kind of start putting all of these individual farms together? What's kind of hidden there is the philosophy bubble of why are we doing this? What are we doing? What are the bigger questions? So next. So this is actually my last slide. This is just my personal website. And below here is kind of the three things to focus on. This is create more. This one is waste less, which you can't see. And then just do a better job. And so that's kind of the three ways we can approach aquaculture is, so one of the big questions is, do we actually need more fish? So do you guys know what happened population-wise last week?
8 billion.
8 billion, right. I teach a class this semester called Feeding the Next 2 Billion, which I set up 5 years ago when we had 7 billion people. So now you need to change it to Feeding the Next Billion. But yeah, population is growing. They estimate by 2030 we're going to have 10 billion people, which is 28% more people. But they say we need 56% more food. Why do we need 56% more food if we only have 20% more people?
Waste a lot.
Because we waste a lot. Yeah. And there's a lot of people saying we can feed 10 billion people without creating more food if we manage our list, if we do these things. Yeah.
Plenty of food, just a lot of it's wasted.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it's an access and equitability issue rather than just a total amount.
And liability.
And liability?
Yeah, like we're talking about, I waitressed for a lot of years, I was getting my undergrad.
Yeah.
And we had a waitress whose dad had a pig farm. And we used to actually put unconsumed food in a slot bucket until the restaurant became concerned about the liability of the pigs getting. And I think, these dates that the Best Buy, the Used Buy, a lot of food gets thrown out based on that also.
Right.
These sort of
Yeah, France did away with use by dates and decreased food waste immediately by 20%. Because again, you're not, the best, I saw like ancient Himalayan salt and had a Best Buy. That's ancient, come on. So yeah.
2,000 years ago.
No, it was like next year. It's like, it's something. So yeah, so this is, and so I created this website a long time ago, and I teach an introduction to sustainability. I teach this class, Feeding the Next Billion Solutions for Food Futures. And it really made me think about this whole thing of, do we need to create more? And so some of it is when you start looking at the way people talk about it, it's like, are we delivering enough calories? And so right now, if you think you need about 2,000 calories per day, give or take, depending on how much you work it up. Like every country except 2 are producing over 2,000 calories per day. So we're feeding, we should have enough food for our people. We still have 800 million people who are starving. We have 3 million people that are malnourished. So this is the next question of, when you say create more, what are we creating more of? Are we creating more calories? So I did some work looking at omega-3 fatty acids. Responsibility. I did some work looking at omega-3 fatty acids. So again, the dietary guidance of the United States says eat 8 ounces of fish a week. Okay? That's 26 pounds a year. How many pounds, how does that compare to pounds of beef and chicken we eat every day?
400 pounds a year. Something crazy like that.
Yeah, it's like 180 somewhere.
Somebody said.
Yeah, so it's almost an order of magnitude less, okay? But yet this is the only way we're getting like selenium and omega-3 fatty acids, okay? Good, so now you go out and you're gonna eat seafood. How do we eat seafood? Again, you guys are probably a unique subset, but
Right.
fried. Yeah, we eat fried, which actually just like decreases the omega, it ruins a lot of that omega nutrition. Yeah. I have something else to say about fried in a minute, but let's stay on this. Let's stay on this focus of how do we eat seafood? Steam? No, they're not. How about species-wise? Again, seafood. We're not eating seafood. Then we have to go out and actually eat.
A lot of shellfish, I think, in the Northeast.
In the Northeast, yeah, but if you look at the U.S.
Oh, you're eating cod.
Farm fish.
Yeah.
Okay, we have cod, we have farm fish. So cod is actually cod is like 5th or 6th, I think, on the list.
Tilapia, something yucky.
Tilapia is 4th on the list.
Salmon.
Salmon 2nd. Tuna, sure. And canned tuna, not fresh tuna.
Shrimp.
Shrimp, number 1.
Makes sense.
That's what we eat. So we eat 16 pounds of seafood a year, not the 26 pounds that the government says we should eat. And of that 16 pounds, about 25% of it is shrimp.
You know where it comes from?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
You read about it, you won't eat it.
Oh yeah, I'll talk about shrimp. So, so the issue with shrimp is that shrimp actually isn't a high omega-3 species. And so if you look at all the fish we're getting our omega-3s from, a majority of it is actually our salmon and trout, which is the 2nd species we're eating. And salmon only jumped up to the number 2 spot recently. It used to be shrimp, tuna, salmon. Recently, salmon popped up. But so again, we're kind of pushing in a lot of our nutrition into that. And this is where oysters and seaweed are like really, really good because they have omega-3 fatty acids, they have selenium, they have a lot of these nutrients. But yeah, they haven't bumped in like clams and oysters have been down at the number 10 spot for a decade. And they're not moving up. And why is that?
They're expensive.
We've got a huge decrease in oyster population as of what was the 1900s with the introduction.
We talked about that. And so this is where aquaculture can come in and say, ooh, we're losing out on that natural population, we can supplement it. This is the human condition. We used to hunt deer, we used to have buffalo, we used to have all these mammals, and then all of a sudden say, oh, we're going to substitute that all in with cow. We've done this again and again. The question is, what are the mistakes we've done then, and how do we stop making those same mistakes? So back to shrimp. when you go to a market, there's basically 3 different types of shrimp you can get. You can get wild caught, which a lot of it's from the US, and huge bycatch issues. Like 10 pounds of other species are caught for every pound of shrimp. I've heard estimates as like 16 pounds. Like, yeah. And a lot of the bycatch is just like junk species like jellyfish and stuff we actually can't use, and so it sits on deck for a while and then gets come back. I mean, so wild shrimp is its own beast in itself. So if you talk about aquaculture, there's 2 species of shrimp. There's white, which is an anime species, and there's black tiger, which is a monodon species. Most of what we get is anime. It's white. It's farmed intensively. So you'll dig a pond, a lot of times they line ponds, you're feeding the animals, you're aerating the ponds because you have so many animals in there. A lot of times you're using antibiotics. It's a really artificial system. Monodon can be done in the same way, but it's not as easy. So much more of monodon production is a small farmer that'll have an acre pond. And what they do is they just put the shrimp in the pond and they don't feed it. And a lot of these are even integrated in the mangrove areas. And so it's like, they call it, like we do with farming, silviculture, combination of farming and forestry. So they'll do these silviculture ponds. Most growers have only a single pond. So we have different ways of doing shrimp. So everybody's like, oh my God, shrimp is so bad, but it doesn't have to be. And so there's growers in Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and India that are doing this monodon in these extensive systems. So in March every year, there's a big seafood show in Boston. If you've ever been to it, if you haven't, you should go. It's fascinating. Companies come from all over the world. You guys haven't used there sometimes. Used to shop roasters. Yeah. So yeah, it's some stuff locally, a lot of international stuff. And so I was at a meeting about these black tiger shrimp, and they were basically saying, this is great, small farmers, it's carbon neutral, even though nobody's ever assessed that. But it's unfed, it's great, but the market wants more. So let's get the farmers to grow more. Let's get the farmers to use feed. Let's get the a brood stock program going, right? Let's intensify. And nobody ever, so there's kind of these questions of, can we do something? And that's where a lot of the research comes in. Can we do this? Can we do this? Do we do it? Can you take that research and can you apply it? But the last question is, should we do it? And nobody's really stopping to ask these farmers, hey, do you want to feed your animals? Do you want to switch from an extensive production system to an intensive production system? These are kind of the questions we don't ask. And we've done this again and again and again. We've done it in agriculture. We've gone from small-scale family farms to now a small-scale family farm is somebody who works a bank job and on the weekend farms 3,000 acres of corn because he can do it by himself. It's a side gig now. That's what's considered a family farm. Why are they producing all this corn? Because the government's guaranteeing them a price. There's nothing saying, oh my God, if I overproduce corn, I'm not going to get anything for it, I'm going to go produce something else. It's like, oh, we'll do biofuel, so 10% of all corn is grown for human consumption, 10%. 40% is biofuels, 50% is animal feed. So again, previously they were talking about fertilizer. What is that going to do? I just something very shiny happened outside. Sorry. And I was also thinking back to your comment about fertilizer and the global fertilizer situation. 40% of all fertilizer comes from Russia.
Ukraine is not fertilizer.
Right. And so when you start putting economic sanctions against them, you just have these massive consequences. And actually, Sri Lanka just went through not a coup, but they ran their president out of office. He escaped over to the Maldives. But basically, they said, we're going to stop subsidizing fertilizer sales. And the farmers are like, and food production locally crashed. I mean, Sri Lanka's in a really bad state. The interesting thing is that the way this was reported on is that they were saying that the government switched to organic production.
Oh, that's a great twist.
And I was reading these like, oh my God, you know, they switched to organic production, and then everybody's like, it failed. And then all of a sudden, in our class, I had a student, he was doing a report on this, and he's like, no, it's not that they mandated organic production, they aren't subsidizing fertilizers. And again, press being press, the only way they can explain that is, oh, if you're not using synthetic fertilizers, you're organic. But there was never this mandate to go organic, it was just like, we're not gonna.
Yeah, I saw it, Amanda Shiva posted something about it.
Yeah.
On the website. And, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, how did I get from shrimp to there? Path dependencies. We keep going down this path. You know, a long time ago we used to, well, we saw shellnets from 10,000 years ago, so 20,000 years ago, you know, we were hunting everything. And then we started culturing it and you know, taking care of plants and animals in a way that benefits us. But we keep kind of going down that path. And so the problem is we have something like aquaculture, which we still can influence and we still can do many different ways. And yet we keep saying what worked in the past for agriculture, which I don't like air quotes, but I'll use air quotes because I'm not sure it worked. There's been this big consolidation. We mentioned Bayer and Monsanto. Bayer bought Monsanto. It's like, you're just getting these big companies. You get this consolidation, then that's why you get the lack of adequate distribution. Cargill, which is a big company everybody should know the name of, they started as a grain elevator in Minnesota in the 1800s. So they were basically buying grain from farmers because the farmers didn't have a way to distribute it. So once they kind of had their arms around grain, then they could control it. They could release it at a price for them. They made a lot of money. They are now, I think, 20 times bigger than McDonald's. They're massive. And you don't hear about it because they're still just a family-owned company. But they have their handprints everywhere. But they'll go into Africa on a good year and buy up all the extra whatever they're producing and warehouse it, and then in bad years sell it back to them at a profit because they have the infrastructure set up to do it. So this inequality is really systemic, baked into it. And again, so this is where, you know, when we talk about aquaculture, everybody thinks disasters. At lunch we were talking about Washington State just stopped salmon farming because a couple of years ago they had a system collapse. And again, it has this really bad, people can't differentiate, you know, they hear aquaculture and they know it's bad because a salmon farm in Washington State collapsed. And then they say, well, seaweed is aquaculture, therefore that's bad, and oyster is aquaculture, you know. So again, we're kind of trying to paint these things with this really big brush, like we really need these super nuanced discussions. Even within shellfish, there's good ways to do it, there's bad ways to do it. You know? And so, again, it's looking for ways to do it better. And how do we kind of push and help, not even push the industry, but help the industry get to where they need to be. So earlier you were asking questions about what are the ways, you know, what's needed. That's a great first question. Because again, you find out what everybody's missing, and then that's what you go no fix. So most people in here are plant people. You know, you've heard of Liebig's law of the minimum, right? No. So Liebig's law of the minimum. Yeah, you know. So Liebig's law of the minimum is actually Liebig, who was a German chemist, he stole the idea from somebody else, but it's known as Liebig's law of the minimum. So, but he says, imagine you're growing a plant and you have all the nutrients the plant needs, but imagine it as a barrel, and each of the nutrients is a stave of the oak barrel, and then you cut them to different heights. You can only fill the barrel as much as the shortest stave. So in plants, if that's phosphorus, then you add phosphorus, and then you can grow the plant until the next thing becomes the limit. And so what you do is you just go through and you figure out what's the pain point, and you fix it. And then you go on, and then you find out what's the next pain point, and then you fix it. So, you know, the overall thing is, when you think about sustainability, it's not a magic bullet. There's not one thing you do. If you produce an oyster, that's not a sustainable system because everything else is going on in the system. You know, and so again, what we need to do is we need to think about these mechanisms, so how we can do things better, but then how does that influence the system? What do you guys think about that?
I'm so wondering about the fried food.
Oh, Frank, thank you. Thank you. As you can tell, I drifted away from that. We looked at a study. We pulled menus from all chain restaurants in the United States, and a chain restaurant is any restaurant that has more than 20 shops. So we're talking Red Lobster. Red Lobster has 1,400 stores. You know, Chili's, and anything that sells seafood. And we actually looked at both provenance. So on their menu, were they saying what it was? And then also we looked at like color content and all this. And so seafood is presented fried. And again, usually when you do that, like the Cheesecake Factory's menu is like a seafood meal is like 2,500 calories. It's our full day caloric needs in a single meal. And it's fried, which means that you're starting to degrade all the benefits of it. But more surprising is that 80% of the seafood sold by chain restaurants doesn't say how it was made. Is it wild or aquaculture? Doesn't say what the species are. So think about it. You get seafood cheddar. Oh,
It's gonna be scary, right?
it could be scary, right? Yeah, yeah. Fish sandwich, fish tacos. You know, they're just not even saying. Even when something is like shrimp scampi, it doesn't say wild or caught. It doesn't say species. You know, and again, it's this reductionist attitude of seafood. There's a group at Johns Hopkins University. They do really interesting information work, and part of them were this seafood menuing thing. But they also looked at, you know, the idea that we mostly buy seafood in restaurants, and so this is a fascinating way to how data can influence what you say. If you look at seafood purchases, a majority of what we buy in the United States come from restaurants. If you look at seafood volume, we're mostly buying it from retail and eating it at home. So if you look by value, so when you go out, you splurge. You're like, oh, I'm not going to use lobster because everybody's like, why am I paying $20 for lobster?
Wow, it's $20 versus $20.
40 and 60. Yeah, show me your cigarettes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yet the lunch when they're hanging, everybody didn't talk. Yeah.
They're not.
No, they're not. Yeah, the number of people who touch it. So anyway, but when you go out, you spend more. When you eat it at home, you actually tend to buy the cheaper stuff. This is where salmon is increasing because we're producing salmon at volume, the price is coming down, and we're getting in there. Tilapia, a lot of fish sticks, breaded fish products. We're eating the cheap stuff at home. So even just the way we look at data, and somebody earlier said we don't have good data. We don't. We don't know really what we're doing.
Why do you think most people eat shrimp? I guess, all your studies and your research, out of all the things that they could eat, why would they pick shrimp versus a fillet of
Yeah.
Because it's not fish.
Least fishy.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear him say it. No, why is it?
Yeah, I think it's taste. It's sweeter. It doesn't have that fishy flavor. This is why mackerel, sardines, and herring are so great, and we don't eat them because again, it's a more complex flavor.
So why are oysters, which you're saying are so good for us? I won't put a raw oyster in my mouth.
No.
Right? But I'll eat a fried oyster. But that's just because it's not fishy or it's not sweet. But if they're that good for you, why don't people? How do you eat an oyster out of the raw? What do you do? I don't know. I live here. I don't even know.
Blend it.
Blend it.
Yeah,
With kale. No, but I think it's cultural. I do have to say, I didn't grow up here, and I fed fish all my kids since very little. My partner is vegetarian. He can smell fish like 3 blocks from. It's like I ate something outside because I don't eat fish in my house anymore because he can't stand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I come back from somewhere after having a margarita and and he still smells the fish, and it's cultural. I think it's cultural.
Yeah.
Definitely United States.
Yeah.
And you go outside of the United States and people eat all kinds of fish
Yeah.
and different products from the sea. They eat that more than they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you don't eat it, you don't teach your kids to eat it, your kids don't teach your grandkids to eat it. It's okay, they have a mom.
Even in the office, have you noticed, in the office, if somebody warms up fish in the microwave, like, who warmed up fish?
Yeah.
Because it's something that I think a lot of people have an aversion to.
And so part of that is, fish is a perishable product. We used to do a really bad job at preserving it. And when I say preserving it, I mean freezing, getting it to a store. And so I grew up in Illinois, fish for me was my mom would do fish sticks like once a month. And, she would overbake them and it would be hard. And
Lots of kids.
yeah, exactly. A lot of, it's a conveyance for something else. And that's probably, I'm guessing when you eat a fried oyster, you probably dip it in a sauce of some sort.
It's usually breaded.
Yeah, and it's breaded, yeah. So again, the frying destroys some of the volatile chemicals that make it so fishy, but it's fatty. There's a lot of other things
Salt.
going on. Salt. Yeah, fat and salt. Yeah, and salt and fat will get your taste buds to be like, oh, that's great.
And then you buy from some company the fish oil pills, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Wait, actually, in our study, we were finding that studies that would actually use a fish oil supplement weren't getting the same benefits as whole fish. So again, much as we saw with the fertilizer, like, ooh, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. Fish is a complicated thing. And when we start doing this real reductionist, I'm gonna get my protein here, I'm gonna get my carbohydrates here, I'm gonna get my nutrients here. And so some of it is this idea of, you know, food as medicine. You know, I know Walter Rowland at Tufts University, he's kind of one of the big proponents of this. You know, doctors should be able to prescribe somebody to eat a banana. Like, you know, you should say you have to go out and eat, you know, fish. You know, you need to go out and do that. So I understand the principle. It just, when we talk kind of the idea of philosophy in the kind of the system, the food system, why do we consider food as medicine?
Because, yeah,
Okay, 100 years ago, did we consider food as medicine?
how many years ago, wait, life?
I know, right?
That's not a fair comparison.
Processed, nutrient depleted
Yeah.
products.
Right, because the system has started providing us stuff that's not really food.
Mhm.
And so if you think about it, food as medicine is actually reinventing something that maybe 100 years ago we were already industrialized, or 200 years ago, we knew. You knew what to eat, you knew how to eat, you knew, and it's really the system is failing us, you know? And so I teach at UMass Boston. It's an urban campus. 50% of our students are first generation college students, first kids in their family ever to go to school. Another subset of the is another 50% are actually non-native speaking, non-English native speaking students. So a lot of, you know, first generation immigrant students. And when you ask them, you know, you have $1 and you're hungry, what do you buy? And you offer them a hamburger or a carrot, they go for the hamburger because it's filling them up. It's getting them there. You know, I'm much better now than I was, but when I was 4 and I had 2 kids, there was a weekly meal at McDonald's just because I could feed them for cheap. And so part of it is, you know, and so when you get into the price of food, you start getting into these really interesting hypocrisies where you want to pay farmers for what they produce, and you want them to get value, okay? Same time, from a government level, you want food to be cheap, because if food gets really expensive, you will have a revolution. And food is great. Food is expensive. So how do you get the price of food down?
Subsidized corn.
Subsidized corn, which then encourages monopolies to go in and start producing chips and all these other things that are, again, are really not as nutritive as what we should be eating.
Or overproduction.
And overproduction, yeah. And so now we're getting into this kind of the philosophy of who's in control, who's running these things, you know.
Also, again, food is luxury nowadays, but the average common denominator.
Well, good food, really, it's tremendous market distortions.
Yeah.
And they made corn so cheap and why they call shrimp so expensive.
Right, yeah.
We're feeding corn to cows, they're not supposed to eat corn, so they get
Yeah.
sick, so then they get antibiotics because they're getting sick,
Right.
because they're not supposed to be feeding corn.
So it all comes back to there.
It's not. Fish that weigh more than 10 pounds.
Ah,
An excellent education.
fish that weigh more than 10 pounds are not good for you. I know. Okay, number one, not true. Okay, true. I agree with, it's not true. But what's the thought that gets us to saying fish more than 10 pounds is not good?
So
farm fish. She's probably referring to a farm fish.
It's all fraud.
Well, is it also that they're hired on a tertiary scale,
There
so
you go.
they're eating
Right,
all that?
Oh, they're really getting.
What?
okay, so big fish are predators. Right, bioaccumulation. So this is, so omega-3 fatty acids are produced by algae. Okay, and then small fish eat the algae and get the omega-3s, and those are the herrings and mackerel. And then big fish come in and they eat the herring and mackerel, and they get omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, those are the salmon and the tuna. Okay, so what we just did with omega-3 fatty acids, we can do with mercury. Right, mercury bioaccumulates the same way omega-3 fatty acids. So if you eat herring, they may have a little bit of mercury, but not much. But because they've accumulated it, and then the big fish eat it and do that, it accumulates up the food chain. Hence, this statement, any big fish is not good for you. It's because of this mercury issue. Okay. Problem is that when you look at mercury levels, there's only like 4 species that you really need to avoid because of mercury. There's like filefish, tilefish. Can't remember the other 2 right now. But there are actually things we don't even really need.
Fish
Yeah,
and
filefish.
what are those?
Yeah, they're marine fish. They're small.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. You know a triggerfish. They're kind of like in that same family, the Tlusty family. They're kind of bony. Not a lot of people eat them.
So the 10-pound fish you're saying is okay, or you agree with that?
No, I'm saying that in general, 10-pound fish is okay. And it's not about fish, it's about species. And actually, one of the benefits of finfish aquaculture is you control what they eat. You are giving them feed. So if you make sure your fish meal doesn't have heavy metal contaminants in it, your product won't. So one of the benefits of aquaculture is when there are pollution issues, you can separate yourself out from those pollution issues.
So, I mean, I think like one of the other things that I think is an issue is that we generalize, right? Like, it's like, we're gonna go this street and no way any other, like, the tunnel vision. It's like what you're saying is if like you're in an area that is like, have, I don't know, a spill or whatever, then you will separate and have a contained place where you can feed the fish. And when you're not, you have other options. But I think like the other thing that happens is like this idea that like, I mean, in our organization, for example, we talked about organic all the time, and like why we started with organic and what was the basis of organic, and organic now is like not really the thing that people wanted to have, you know, it's like over-regulated, it depends on the scale, like, it's a lot of bad things and a lot of good things about it, but it depends, right? So like, I think that the idea that we just gonna one-fits-all solution is a problem.
So in your discussion of organic, what was some of the, like, not even your group, but the idea of organic? What did you come
And I
to
think
like?
like, we didn't, like, when the organization started, I think we didn't even have language, like, I think that for many things, so it's like pillars of organic, they're like certain practices, they're like.
But I'm not talking about your organization, but the idea of organic had to arise from somewhere. Okay, and if you look at it, it really was 1970s, 1980s that the organic movement really came to fruition. What kind of movement do we have now?
Sustainable.
Well, sustainable, like the regenerative.
Regenerative, yeah.
Everybody now is like, we're regenerative. Okay, so again, going back 200 years ago, were we organic?
Yes.
Yes. Were we regenerative?
Yes.
Yes. So those are ideas that went away over time, and now all of a sudden we've invented them. This is like, I mean, I don't know if there's any Jungian psychologists, maybe it's some collective conscious that we became amnesic for a while, and then also we remembered all these things. But yet, again, everybody's like, I just invented regenerative production.
I mean, a lot of
It's such an old
indigenous,
idea.
a
It's,
lot of indigenous practices were
yeah,
what people are calling regenerative. I mean, I guess what you're saying,
Exactly.
somebody's stole somebody's technology and I was making money out of it.
so the beginnings of this organic movement, what was it really trying to differentiate?
Big agriculture that was fuel-based and chemical.
High input agriculture versus small family farm.
Increases the because of additions to food.
Human disease or,
foods.
yeah, animal disease, yeah. So one thing that you need to differentiate in that is organic is a process, and it actually says nothing about what the product actually is. So a lot of people are like, oh, organic is guaranteed to have more nutrients. No, that is a product specification. Organic is how are you growing it? So it's a process. So this process product thing, oftentimes people get them confused. And again, the product is really more of a state regulation, national. I'm using state as a broad, but it's really more of a regulated thing. You know, is it food safe? That's a product. The process is really more under voluntary control. Not everybody has to be organic, you choose to be organic. If you have an eco label, you choose to have the eco label, they're voluntary. Some countries are actually trying to mandate eco labels as part of their growing process, because a lot of, especially in seafood, certifications started out because we didn't trust the way other countries were producing their products. So we actually wanted to go in with an extra layer of checks. That was the whole reason seafood eco labels started. It was just we didn't trust other countries where we couldn't understand the language. And surely they're not doing things the way we are. But yeah, so the product processing is really important to keep apart. There's nothing in the organic standard that says it has to have more nutrients, it has to have a set level of nutrients. There's nothing about what comes out of it. You can have just as junky of a thing come out of an organic process as you can a non-organic process. So don't, yeah, we need to kind of keep those things too. But so again, organic is really about how are we doing it. Again, growing up in Illinois in the 1980s when farms were being bulldozed under for subdivisions, organic was like, no, we have to save this because it's not doing something the way the big corporations are firm. And so again, what did we do? We focused on lack of chemical inputs, okay? So who was one of the biggest organic pineapple producers in the country in like the 90s? Dole. These big corporations said, oh, thank you, we're gonna do this, you know? And actually the first organic pineapple crop Dole had was a crop that they weren't spraying, but they were spraying every single field around it. So it's just like, well, we're not spraying that one. So they, you know, again, the minute you set up a rule, corporations are gonna step in and say, how do we game the system to our advantage? But
it's not a value anymore.
yeah, and so this is the question, yeah, is it a value?
Yeah.
And everything has a shelf life, you know, maybe it's time to put it to bed. This is the problem where regenerative is now supposed to replace organic. Like, we don't have to rules.
Or the real organic.
Or the real organic. Or some people are like, well, regenerative is organic, like what's the difference? And part of it is the more you muddle the situation, the less impact we can actually have, because everything gets so confusing. And you get people out there, you know, I'm regenerative, I'm organic, I'm, you know. Yeah, and so, you know, the question is, if we actually cared about societies in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have a fair trade certification label. Like, if we had that, would we have not gone down the organic path? Because it would have been about protecting small family farmers. But again, like I said earlier, we're now gaining that because, you know, people are farming huge tracts of land and calling it a small family farm. On the same course, if you grow $1,000 of produce, you can claim you're a farm and you can get a tax credit as farmland. So I know a number of people like in Concord, New Lexington, that grow tomatoes. $1,000 of tomatoes every year, and they get a tax credit.
They get a tax credit as a farm.
Yeah.
But
Or
yet,
sunflowers or pumpkins.
but yet in the state, you're supposed to have, you have to have at least 3 acres to be considered a farm and have all farm taxes. In the state of Massachusetts. Yeah, I'm positive of that. But that's a rule on me, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what and some states don't have it. It's really, yeah.
I think that's comes down. There's a USDA. That's like the line. If you want to get your farm ID number, you have to prove you sell $1,000 worth of produce, and then you become eligible for grant funding and so on.
Someone has a vehicle. And they can get, it's not like a full-fledged farm,
Yeah.
but because they have a beehive that they sell the honey, they
Uh-huh.
can get a certain credit.
Yeah, certain
It's
golf
not-
courses have like 6 goats
Yeah,
because it's farm.
those poor goats.
It's something that concerns me is this conversation that we're having. Often the messaging in the public forum is led by folks like Patagonia or, you know, Stone Barn Center, Dan Barber, his book, and, you know, even here at North Mass, it's almost an elitist concept. And so where do we go?
Well, this gets back to food is expensive. And if you want, it looks like we're finishing. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's sorry. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it can't be elitist, but it is.
They have money to sponsor all those big things.
But in Patagonia, you know, they were pushing a mussel product, which is great, but they were getting like European mussels, and it's just like, okay, no, wait.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many local sources that we could be doing better.
We had a farm in Huntington, where he's from, in one of the richest cities in the state. And we could sell, this was 5 or 6, 7 years ago, we were selling heirloom tomatoes, $6 a pound. I said, how much are you getting from? I would never pay $6. One tomato was $6. But there were no poor people coming in with snap, whatever that thing is.
Yes.
You know, food stamp. They were buying them. There were no questions. All you had to do was make sure they weren't produced. And we were in this magical place. They paid the bills.
Yeah.
And kids that work for us have gone out and been farmers, and they're still broke. You know, I just don't do it. You know, I don't do it. Yeah. You know, and we were just, it was your family's place, and it was in the right place, in the right community, you could make money. But it's hard to make money as a small farm.
You said I needed to tell more jokes.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't have any good jokes, but one I have is how to make $1 million in aquaculture. Start with them. Yeah.
I think what I need to jokes with Annie is starting late.
I know. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, maybe purify it and make it sweet water, because it's gonna run out of pure water pretty soon.
Yeah, water rights are going to be.
I heard, a lot of these companies are buying up a lot of the water resources, knowing that.
Oh, yeah, it's already been done. You can go look at it. They're already on there.
Well, like Nestle, industrial water gets sold by the acre foot, which is how much water you can fill an acre of water 1 foot. That's an acre foot of water. And they buy it for like $70 an acre foot. And then they clean it up and bottle it and sell it for like $1,000.
200 acre food.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking of when we're talking about nutrients, and when I was showing you the slides about the value of the oyster industry dropped during 2020 during the pandemic. And I remember, I don't know if you recall, zinc kind of went on high demand because that micronutrient is important for your immune system, keeping it functioning at a high functionality. And oysters are one of the highest sources of natural zinc. So here we are, we have this industry that's being supported primarily by the restaurants, giving this product that has this micronutrient that is in high demand, that is not making the connections.
Right. Yeah.
Like now, like I feel like these organizations and notes, been doing this, the micronutrient like density in vegetables, because I think is important. It's an important thing for people to know. Is your food just look pretty, or is your food actually feeding you?
Yeah.
But I don't think it gets as much attention as like obviously 1,200-pound pumpkin. It's cultural. It's really weird. But I do feel like when we don't talk about apples and oranges when we're talking about this, like you were saying, like I don't think people know what fish is good to eat. Like I don't know if people know, the difference between like a fish and a mammal and an ocean. It's like, okay, are we eating? It's like chickens and other animals that look like chickens that we get eaten.
I did have a question.
Yeah.
Tilapia.
Mm-hmm.
Which fish family is that in? Because I never, this is me speaking, I never ate it because I was always afraid of it. Because it has lips, the only fish that has lips.
No, it's not the only one.
They all use lips. No, really, it has big, real big lips, and I'm trying to figure out if it's generic or not. Is it? Which
Yeah, so one of the reasons they actually have,
is it GMO?
they don't, okay. So, one of the reasons they don't really have lips, but they're a mouth group. And so they actually hold the eggs in their mouth. So the lip actually functions as a way to actually help keep the eggs in their mouth. So yeah, fish have all these different breeding strategies. So like oysters just broadcast spawn, they just put their gametes out in the water, and they have 1,000 eggs at a time, or no, 1,000,000 eggs at a time, just one. And then other fish nest, and they actually build a nest, and it's kind of like birds, and they defend the nest. Usually the males defend the nest because the females are spending energy making the eggs. But if you think like Finding Nemo, there was a nest of eggs. And actually, fun fact, in Finding Nemo, clownfish are sequential hermaphrodites, meaning they change sex. And the biggest fish on the reef is always a female. So Merlin, Nemo's dad, if you remove the female, he would have transformed into a female.
I'm glad that didn't happen.
I'm going back to tilapia for a second. There's a Harvard grad fisherman in town who said tilapia and fish should not be in the same sentence. Meaning, tilapia is not, it's a real fish. I don't know where it came from, but we don't eat it here. We don't even allow it.
We don't eat it here.
No, you eat it in Illinois. And we have places.
Yeah, but if you look globally, tilapia is one of the most produced fish in aquaculture because it's freshwater. It actually can live at a really high density. NASA did these stocking experiments, and they were looking at a pound of fish per gallon. I mean, just like these incredible, highly dense stocking areas. So part of it is they're a super hardy fish. They're actually super invasive. So the fish originated in Egypt and is now found throughout the world because they've been spread all over, because the Peace Corps was actually, feed people, teach them how to grow tilapia. And so for protein, which many countries are protein deficient. So we talk about food adequacy and carbohydrates. Protein is a totally different issue. It's a good source of protein, it's lean, it's easily digestible. So one thing when you start looking at protein is that a lot of protein, like, we can't really use fully. And so if you look at a food label, it'll say, calories, 20% of your daily value, and carbohydrates, 10% of your daily value, and then it says protein, 7 grams. And it doesn't say anything because every protein has a digestibility value. So 7 grams may only be 50% usable, or it could be 100% usable, rather than make companies figure that out. But fish protein is really usable. So again, for the food system globally, tilapia and carp are really important because they're easier to grow, they can take high densities. They actually both can be grown extensively or intensively, so a lot of times tilapia are co-cultured with shrimp. And they actually help keep, so Vibrio parahemolyticus, that's the bacteria in oysters that makes us sick. That actually causes this thing in shrimp called early mortality syndrome. And actually, when you grow shrimp with tilapia, they get less Vibrio parahemolyticus. So co-culture, and it's kind of getting at that IMTA thing. You have shrimp living on the bottom and the fish living above. They're starting to create a little bit more of the community. So this is the problem is, really tilapia isn't so much about tilapia itself, it's about freshwater fish. Okay. Freshwater fish have a taste profile much different than marine fish.
And crab. So when I think about
Clown crab.
we see tilapia and then, oh my God, crowd.
Crowd, yeah.
I don't know, there's some pictures.
Yeah, so again, it's really more, when I lived out in Newfoundland, they had this trout pond and they would fish, and somebody came in the lab and was going, oh my God, this trout is bad, it's bad, and you taste it, it's like, that's just grassy, that's a freshwater fish. Yeah. Because it's Newfoundland, they never really had freshwater fish. And you taste it, it's grassy. There's ways you can do it. You can decorate them, much like we decorate shellfish. We do that for pathogens. You can decorate fish for taste. You can drive off some of these flavors. You just keep them in super clean water for 2 days.
When we're talking about buying fish, and people, you don't go buy a piece of fish with skin on it. At least most people don't, because they don't know how to debone it or skin it.
Right.
They would never eat it, maybe culturally whole with the skin on, and just and so when we catch fish at home, it's like, oh shoot, now we gotta clean it. It's not right. It was awesome to catch it. We put it back. Let's have it something. It's like, oh, what a mess. And the witches are out, and it's low tide, and there's blood everywhere. And I'm sure. So I tell you, it's exhausting, But we've got a lot of stripers, which feed an army. And as long as you eat it, I think you have to eat it soon, not too right. Don't keep it around too long.
Well, I'm a real advocate for frozen fish for that reason. If you can freeze it immediately.
Mothership frozen.
Yeah, right. And so that's part of it. Like, fish in the fish counter has to get replaced like every 2 hours. And so what they do is they thaw, and then you watch, the fish counter, they'll get a bag of frozen shrimp, they'll dump it in, it'll thaw for 2 hours, and then if it's not sold, they have to dump it and they have to get another one. So the fish counter actually drives up, it drives up the price, but it also drives up waste. because then they have to get rid of it. And in fact,
happens?
yeah, whole fish in the fish counter has 50% loss. 50% of the whole fish in the fish counter will get thrown.
Whole fish.
Whole fish. Because nobody wants to buy whole fish.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Not fillet fish.
Right, not fillet, but still you get a lot of waste. The other thing is when you buy, I was gonna say fresh fish, but even a lot of it is, they say this is refresh fish, which just means it's been frozen on the thawed. But once you buy that thawed fish, you take it home and, you know, I buy fish and I get home and I'm like, I'm too tired, I'll grab something on the way home. And then you put it in the refrigerator, you forget about it for 3 days and you go, ooh,
What's that
and then you throw it away. And yeah, it's gone.
So,
Frozen fish, you put it in your freezer and it's like, oh, I'm getting to use it today, and you take it out. So frozen fish just inherently has a lot less waste to it. And so when you talk about greenhouse gas production, you only waste about 20% of any fish that's sold in a frozen form. Where if it's sold in a fresh form, you almost have to double the amount you're producing just to get it home to the plate because there's so much waste.
I hope this is not off topic, but
Nothing's.
how do we, like, the shellfish,
Uh-huh.
like the crabs and the lobster? Now it's under the ground, under the water.
Yeah.
How do we recycle that? Because, you know, there's a lot of things being thrown in the ocean, like styrofoam,
Uh-huh.
and they tell us not to, you know, use styrofoam. So you can't recycle it, it's killing fish.
Mhm.
What about the shells? Like the shellfish, like the lobster and the crabs?
Right.
So how do we recycle
That was
those?
integrated, you can put it in the compost.
Put it in the compost?
And by eaten by
The
bacteria.
shells.
You put the shells in compost?
So,
Oh, I didn't know.
and- so, and-
It's like bones.
Anne, who was just talking, that's kind of her business is they buy a lot of lobster waste that gets processed up in Canada. They're buying it to amend it in. So the EPA has a food waste pyramid. And so the last thing you want to do is throw anything into a landfill.
Yes.
Okay. And then the next step above that is actually use things for fertilizers. Then the thing above it is use it for like industrial uses. And then above that, I think it's pets. And then and then the top is human food. So if there's any way to turn these products into human food, that's great. So I actually worked with a salmon processing company in Scotland, and we looked at the way they were managing all their waste products and basically what they were doing is they were mixing up everything, and in the EU, probably it's the same in the US, when you mix blood in with any other product,
Yes.
it can only be used for fertilizer or landfill. Because it's the blood, you can't, you get squeamish about mixing blood into things. But if they were separating things out, you could take the heads and you could actually sell them for a value-added product back in the human food markets. You know, if you've ever gone to a sushi bar and had like salmon collar, like a lot of times they'll just give you half the salmon head. It's really good because the cheeks, you talk about lips, the cheeks are actually really one of the best parts of the fish. And we actually showed that you could like increase food like by 75%, human food by managing the waste better, and you could increase the value like 800% because you were getting much more money than you were. A lot of times when you're the lobster processors, they actually have to pay to dispose of the shell waste. Even if it's just dragging it up to Maine and dumping it on the field, they have to pay somebody to do that, and Maine's gonna stop that. So we gotta do it.
Fish waste, put it in the freezer and make soup.
Yeah, big stuff. That's
But
good.
a cooked shelled lobster, red,
Mhm.
it will float on the water. It doesn't go away very fast. It's funny, and you know, it's obviously you could cut the tail off and just push the main, shell back in and try to go away fast. But the cook, it looks like a shirt, it's cooked, and you go, oh, the neighbors threw a lobster over what because they had lobster, so it's kind of weird, but it floats around.
Yeah.
I'd rather see it in the compost.
Yeah. But everything in the ocean likes to eat bacon. That's why there's so many lobsters and crabs, and that's why beaches just aren't littered with the shells. It's the minute the shell molds.
Right.
So chitin is that compound that makes up most of the shell. And then just all bacteria are feed it. You know, if there weren't bacteria in chitin, we would be, our beaches would be full of crab and lobster with shells. But they're not, because they get it.
Clams as well, clams.
Hmm?
Clams.
So clams, the shell is a little bit different. There's a lot of programs that collect oyster shell, and you can actually use them to create reefs. So that's something that people do. But again, it's this waste management thing. You have to get the restaurants to save the shell, they pick them up. But again, all these things are all they're all natural products. So one of my grad students is working in New Bedford on an actual way to steam, heat, and dry and grind crab shell waste, because in New Bedford they have 3 million pounds of crab shell waste every year. And so you're getting this brown dried product, and now I just met Ann, and it's like, oh hey, so do that. But some of it is, you know, we're working with Johnson and Wales. You know, how do you put it into a flavoring for the stock enhancer? We just put in some money to see if we can make the lobster bait. Because instead of catching fish, if we took shell waste and put it into a block and it attracts the lobsters, we got something.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
So that's
The green crab,
Yeah.
I want to.
Yeah.